Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Sterling and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard along with Bill Sterling. And you know, Bill, it's interesting how so many people have different perspectives about a topic.
Yes.
Especially a financial topic.
Right.
And when we look at the language, communication being used around that topic from different perspectives at different times, it really does reveal a lot, doesn't it?
It does. It really tips the hand of somebody's, belief or bias or their perspective about different subjects, whether it's government perspective or business perspective and or personal perspective. This is the way I believe the world to be, or this is the way my parents believe the world to be. And if you just do this thing, your life is going to work out just great. Or if you do it this way, that is clearly the best way to do it. But meanwhile, we could be operating with some beliefs that are not as effective or healthful or even truthful, which is something that we want to really poke a stick at a little bit today so that we can really, just kind of have some honesty about, what some of the truth perspectives are.
I think that's great, Bill. And so really, we're in the financial world. What we want to talk about today is debt, the whole concept of debt, the reality of debt. And there's several different levels. There's, obviously personal debt.
Yes.
As an individual or maybe as a family. And then there's business debt if you're in business and how that might be used. And then we also have in our country a national debt. And so those are very different things. I think we should touch on each of those today.
Yeah, I think so. Tom, the challenge is to start slowing down or separating the narratives to those are very, very different things. A credit card debt is different than a debt that you own for your house. I mean, there's differences. I mean, there's kind of similar in their functioning, but there's really kind of differences.
No, there really are. And I would also add into that an automobile loan, perhaps your car,
yes.
There's a difference there.
Very personal.
And people sometimes don't realize that it's actually very easy in general. I mean, even if you don't have a whole lot of income, it's pretty easy to get a car loan because there's an asset against it. And that's a big difference between what you first mentioned, which is a credit card bill.
Right.
Because if you don't pay the car loan for enough months, eventually the lender is going to come and take the car away and sell it to somebody else. And that's why it's kind of easier to get a car loan, because there's an asset against it. They can take back and recover any loss they might have had as a lender. Wasn't it during COVID? I remember last year that there were automobile companies were not only offering zero interest loans to try to get people to buy cars when times were slow. And I think they're still doing that some today, but they also were offering, hey, if you lose your job, you can turn the car in and like no harm, no foul on your credit type of thing.
Right.
There were some of those programs.
Being able to provide support. I mean, the folks in the financial world, they've done a pretty good job of setting up a system so that people are just at the brink of being stretched a little too much. And people push themselves there too, with their own mindset or their own American optimism that I'm always going to have my job. I'm going to always have work. I'll always get paid what I'm getting paid and more. And meanwhile, a lot of that economy, the stable economy, stay in your job economy, has really shifted over the last 30 years, but the beliefs and the biases have not caught up to the person's worldview. So, it's like the job that you had at age 20 or 25 or age 30, you couldn't make it today with the current things that you have at your age, right? And no one ever really talks about, hey, every year you've got to keep up with this inflation thing. You have to keep up with the way the economy is moving. You got to keep up with this stuff, and that is really, really unsettling, because most people being stressed the way they are don't really have time to do the things that would foster a healthier society. Whereas our parents' generation, they had more time and energy because they weren't too stressed regarding money. They were stressed, but not the way it is today. So back then they were stressed when there was one breadwinner and the wife stayed at home and they had enough money to make it work. And and they also had time and energy to contribute to the community, to kids, Optimist leagues and community parks, and actually go out on Sunday and relax. I don't remember the last time I did that, with the family picnic, as if that and really actually do downtime, which is, something that in our current society, there's just not enough money around to take time off or take a vacation or there's just not enough, because you have two jobs to make it work. And there's two people, husband and wife, both doing two jobs in order to kind of keep up with the economy and the work. And then the belief has changed, and the finances have changed around the economy, the work numbers. So it's really unsettling. And so debt is something that people walk themselves into because they're thinking, this should be different. I'm working really hard. It's going to turn around. And the answer is, well, no, not if the wages get, stifled or depressed. It's not turning around anywhere, So yeah, it's
right,
really,
yeah.
really
People's beliefs around debt do really are really quite varied. And some people like, well, I want to take a vacation. I don't have the cash right now. I want to go to Hawaii for a vacation for a week. Well, okay, I can get a credit card and I can use that credit card to go on the vacation. And that's true, you can, but
yes.
Just because you have that credit,
Right.
does that mean you should use it on something like that? I mean, you're going to be paying that off potentially for a long time. And I think especially in the last year, in the context of COVID and so many people losing jobs who really depended on their weekly paycheck, especially in the restaurant industry and travel industry and things like that,
Yes.
they had to turn to debt and credit cards, probably just for basic necessities of life, and by putting food on the table for their family, or maybe paying for medicines or doctor's visits or who knows what.
Sure.
And that is going to have a negative impact, because you run up all that debt, you owe that money, you're going to be paying a lot of interest, and it's kind of hard to dig out of that hole. Plus it impacts your credit scores.
Yep.
Which has a huge impact on your ability to be able to do other things like get that car loan or rent an apartment. They look at your credit scores when you, and the amount of debt you have when you apply to rent an apartment or a home, right?
So our truth perspective that we're really kind of talking at it and poking at is that, well, what if a human being doesn't have that same mindset around money? Their mindset around money is, well, how about if I just run up a bunch of debt, start a business and pay employees, and then in 5 years or whatever, close the business and, do out or cash out, or even, let go of, hey, this thing failed. Sorry, banks, you guys are stuck with, the debt because I took my best shot and you loaned me the money, but I was not able as an entrepreneur to carry it out. And then the person, the company files bankruptcy, and then the individual starts and does it all over again and borrows more money because they're a person that is used to the practice of borrowing money, having debt, and moving money around the way they do it. And that is unsettling because if we're not fiscally responsible, but yet claim ourselves to be fiscally responsible, then again, all you're doing is letting somebody else deal with the wreckage or what it's people say it's the garage sale of a company closing. It's like there's 40 chairs over there, and how can I get 25 cents on the dollar for the chair, or 10 cents on the dollar for the chair that I bought for all the people in this call center that's closed down. I mean, it is a different mindset. And what winds up happening in the business world, it's played one way, like all Amazon took up, Uber, all those big companies, they took on tremendous amount of debt before they really got started and started hitting gold, because they had to scale to a certain volume for them really to really get the chunk of change that was good. And then the investors who go like, yep, we're betting on you guys. Yeah. We're going to throw money at you. And because we're betting, because we think 5, 7, 10 years from now, you're going to give us a whole bigger chunk of change back in payouts. And very, very valuable, because that's what those people spend their time thinking about. Most people do not spend time thinking about that. And that's the difference between a Wall Street mindset and a Main Street mindset. And they're very, very different. So yeah, it's interesting because, Tom, you and I have both borrowed money from friends and relatives and also investors and things in time. And it is something to start shifting your perspective and the truth around debt, how to carry it, how to tolerate it, and not letting that mindset ding your decision making or the mindset of growth. So it's a lot better, a lot easier. So anyway.
No, it's very true. And business debt is very different than personal debt in not only how people think about it, how they approach it, different beliefs around it. And it is very common for businesses to borrow money to start up entirely, and other businesses don't. Other businesses, especially more mom and pop businesses, might borrow just a little bit of money or use their own savings to get started, and then but then grow more organically and actually grow from sales of services or products. But most of the time businesses really need to go into debt. It is a function of business. It is one of acceleration, because you have an opportunity that's time sensitive and you need more money to be able to keep up with growth, or you need more money to just be able to invest, whether it's in tooling or manufacturing something that you're going to sell. I mean, Amazon was notorious back in the early days in the 90s when it started for not turning any kind of profit. They went public relatively early in their history, and they just kept selling more stock. People were buying stock, and that funded the company. And that's a different kind of debt, right? I mean, you're going to have to pay dividends to shareholders eventually, and if you don't, your stock's going to go through the basement. Yep. And your company's not worth much, and it's hard to function. But Amazon, for many, many years, same with Tesla, there are lots of companies like this that spent a lot more money than they earned for a lot of years before they turned profitable.
Right.
And I mean, it is a very common thing. And you're right. I've had businesses where I had angel investors that were friends and family back in the 90s. And that's how we generated the cash to start the business that eventually was sold. And now my current business grew more organically. And we have gotten loans doing what is called debt financing, getting loans, some from the SBA, some from other institutions, some from think of them in air quotes here as investors, but they're companies that lend money to businesses like mine to help them grow. And they make interest, on the money they lend us. And that's part of how we're growing. Or you can get investors that you have to give away equity, all sorts of different ways. But debt is a very common thing for business.
Yeah. See, and that's the challenge, is that if a conservative mindset, if somebody is calling themselves fiscally conservative, they could possibly have the thought that debt is bad, instead of this kind of debt is bad and this kind of debt is good. And they can't draw the line between the word debt. They don't know that there's two different types of debt. So if I go into debt and I build a factory, well, I have an asset now against that money that I borrowed. It's not I've borrowed the money and I bought a non-tangible thing, which is really, really, a big part of the difficulty in a consumer culture, is that we'll buy things that diminish in value instead of buying things that, this is a conservative thing, is I want to buy and pay for, this thing that is not expendable, this bridge. I want to buy this bridge. I want to build this bridge because the last bridge is falling down, but I want to buy this bridge to have this asset around that our country, our city, our economy needs to run the truck over. This bridge, it has to go over this overpass.
Yeah. Well, now you're talking about debt on a different scale, Bill. That's our government debt, and
that's right.
And whether it's states have their own economies and have their own issues with debt, right, or our national economy. Right. And you're right, Bill. It's very different. Like, one example, I have a good friend of mine is a doctor. She's a chiropractor, and a huge part of her business requires taking x-rays, and she just bought for, I think, $120,000 some new fancy x-ray thing, because she's a chiropractor. You want to get your upper cervical vertebrae, your neck and skull, and has this thing where you just sit and it takes a x-ray going 360 degrees around you, gives them a much better picture to be able to treat you properly. And so she borrowed the money to buy that x-ray. But guess what? Now the treatment that she's able to give people is much better, and she's able to charge them for that x-ray, and they're getting better results, and this x-ray thing is going to be paid off in no time. That makes a lot of sense. When you talk about a bridge, like infrastructure or highways or roadways, it's harder to really quantify the return on investment in the same way.
Yeah.
And that is why it becomes a different perspective for people to think about. I mean, we all want good bridges and roads to be able to drive on. I just drove from Colorado to California a couple of weeks ago, and 1,100-mile trip. And boy, I'll tell you, when I got back into California, like, wow, these roads in California, they're really good. They've been putting money into those roads, and in certain parts of Utah, but in other parts of Utah, along Interstate 70, going from east to west or west to east, those roads could use some help.
There's
right?
some spots.
They really need some repair. And I'm sure lots of the bridges I went over are problematic and need repair. And we touched on a little bit of this in our last episode. These types of things, it's important to make an investment in our infrastructure in America. And really, the way our government system is, the only way to do that is for our legislative branch to appropriate the money to pass a bill that then spends it. But the government doesn't really have that money, does it, Bill?
Well, it is crafting the money. It's borrowing the money from different sources. And the number one source it gets its money from is other Americans buying bonds in America. That's the number one source. And I don't know what the percentage is offhand. I just, it's left me here for a second, but it's different.
And then there's at least a third, if I remember right, Bill. I think at least a third of the American debt is owned by Americans in the form of bonds. I believe that's right. I could be off on that. We'll check that.
Yeah. And then the other one is, well, how about foreign countries? How much do they invest and they gamble and put their money in the United States? Well, who's the number one debt person? From the limited knowledge I know, is Japan is the number one.
Yes, I agree. I've seen that too, Bill. Yeah, Japan is the number one holder of U.S. bonds, but it's still a small percentage of the total.
Right.
And people always talk about, as China has risen, that, China owns more of America and is buying our bonds in debt, but China only holds about 5% of the national debt. So it's very interesting. So we should share with our listeners that recently, John Oliver on Last Week Tonight did a whole expose, report on our national debt. And there's a lot that he illuminates there that's just pure facts. And he also illuminates some things that are realities. And he illuminates some things that are beliefs. That different people have around our national debt. But it's very illuminating to learn about our national debt, because I think in America, we are a lot of times driven to believe national debt is bad.
Correct. And that's the thing to really get a hold of, is that what are those different instruments? I mean, there's individuals that own a treasury, securities, and there's mutual funds, there's banking institutions, there's insurance companies, the different state and local governments and only it's like a third of it, I think, is foreign international. And then that's cut into what country, owns the different ones. And all you got to do is start making up a belief that is partly true about China owning, America's like, well, really? How much? And it's not that much as compared to everything. And the debt is mostly owned by, other Americans. And
the other interesting thing
pension
about
funds.
Oh gosh, yeah. Pension funds, investments, all sorts of different investment funds will invest in a mix of stocks, which are not debt at all. You're buying ownership in a company for a hopeful, profit return, or bonds, which don't have as much of an upside return, but are not near as risky. You're going to have value there at the end of the day. You're not going to have a company completely go under because of, it fails and then their stock is worthless. So yeah, there are lots of different organizations, institutions, countries, individuals that own a portion of the United States national debt. And to me, what was fascinating as I was researching this, to learn, is that, there is a lot of times these messages that are put out about the national debt saying, oh, China owns our debt. We can't let China keep buying more of our debt, because when that bill comes due, we're gonna then owe China and be in trouble, and China's going to be able to push us around and control us. And that's some of the messaging around it that happens when people are trying to say national debt is bad, or national debt that owned by a certain country is bad. The reality is there is no mechanism for that bill to come due. It's not like you don't pay your mortgage for 3 months and they're going to come and foreclose on you. It really doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
It goes into, and I'm going to say it's really funny sentence, but restructuring. It's the debt is restructured. It's restructured, that means it's from an illusionary perspective place. It's like, yeah, we're adjusting it and changing it over the field of time. It's like, oh, so like you can make it up as you go and adjust it so that it's going to work better. And that's the thing that's really, really unsettling and really disheartening, is that when we talk about the word truth, and people are trying to influence our biases to get us to vote for things, or influencing our purchases in order for us to really go on the credit card to buy that thing that they've just so enticed us to buy. It's like, uh-oh, it's like, wait a minute. And that's and there's different mindsets that work through this. And some people say, don't spend unless you are spending from the, what you have available. Take risks with this percentage. Don't take risks when you're close to the bone. But if you're close to the bone, how the heck are you going to, be able to swing for the fence? It's like, sometimes you just got to try to hit the home run. And this is the foundation of gambling, and penny stocks and slot machines. Those are small little gambles that are moving forward, that people are going like, well, when I get to the other side, I'll then I'll have. And again, our beliefs and our biases and various different fallacies about these different things, the way money and debt work, is just we need a brain overhaul on this one.
Because we really do. There's a lot of mixed messages out there. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of beliefs. And let me just eliminate one example. Debt and credit certainly in business is necessary. I think in life, honestly, it's necessary. It used to be that maybe our grandparents or my great grandparents wouldn't have had a mortgage to buy a house. They would have saved up and bought a house with money. I remember my grandparents telling me once one house they owned when my father was a boy cost them $10,000. That was the price of the house. And that was in Connecticut. And that was, that was pretty average in a house and not trivial expense. And getting a mortgage for that might have been unthinkable at one point. Now almost no average American buys a home with cash, certainly not their first home. They're going to need to borrow money from a bank, a mortgage, to get that. But in order to be considered a safe risk worthy of being granted approval for a mortgage, you have to have some experience with handling money, having been in debt and paying it off. And this is also true if you're starting a business. If you want to borrow money as a company, guess what? 80% of the lending decisions for whether to loan your business money are based on your personal, as the owner of the business, credit profile and how you have behaved with borrowing money and paying it back personally. Right. So it is necessary to get credit cards, to get a loan, whether it's a car loan or a personal loan. There are strategies around getting into debt for the purpose of displaying good habits and behaviors around money and borrowing and paying it down, and not borrowing too much, borrowing some, but not too much, that make you then an ideal candidate. Okay, now as a business, as a bank, whatever, for your business, we will lend you money. And, that's one of the things when you have a credit card, it's fine to use it, but you want to keep that credit card balance somewhere in the no more than 30 to 40% of the total amount available to you.
So fascinating.
Then if you do that consistently, carry some debt, not a lot, that you can, that then they want to give you more money. It's when
that's right,
you're out of credit and desperate for money and really need to get a loan or another credit card, when then it's very hard to do it. Right.
That's right.
But our national debt doesn't work that way. So the federal government, considering this infrastructure bill, I think it's proposed at about $2 trillion of a package right now. We'll see what it ends up being at the end of the day. Congress is going to pass that bill, and the government is then instructed to borrow that money to be able to fund all the things that are in the bill.
That's right.
The idea being that's going to put people to work. It's going to help repair the infrastructure that allows all of our goods and services to be transported to us and to and from us. And that's the plan anyway, right? That it's
and it's going to be with and it's going to come back around with the tax increase for the wealthy and the corporate things, because it went from 35 to 21 under President Trump, and now they're just bringing it back, or they're bringing it back up to 23 or 27 or something like that.
I heard the original proposal was 28, but it remains to be seen where it ends up. It's still from the beginning of the Trump administration when it was 35, the tax is still going to have been reduced under the current plan from what it was. But what they're trying to do is be fiscally responsible and say, hey, we're borrowing this money right now to invest in America, to put people back to work, but that's going to be paid for by this increase in taxes on corporations, which is coming maybe back halfway, maybe not even halfway to what it was at the beginning of the Trump administration. But the other benefit to the economy is all these people you put to work, millions of more jobs of people getting paychecks and paying taxes.
Pay taxes on that amount. And that's where, it is a dance. I mean, the economy does have a dance to it. And it's and taxes have a dance. It's that it's regrettable that when individuals put the blinders on to say, okay, this way is best. And meanwhile, it's like, yet it's not in alignment with what the truth of the experience is for an entrepreneur that's borrowing money to build a company is different than, a person that's just going and spending the money. There's a lot of different things, and it comes down to the word value. It's like, does this debt have value to it? And if it does, then that's called a moment of stability. Is that if the debt has value, then it's creating stability. And, we kind of need some economic stability showing up here. So that makes sense then. Stability where? Where are we doing stability first? In the health industry. That was the COVID relief, is here's where that stability is. We're going to create stability with these checks. We're creating stability to the government, to the local governments here, to the state governments here. We're creating stability over here. We're creating stability for small businesses over here. It's creating stability so that the system can reboot and restart of the flow of revenue in and out of these various different systems. The public system cannot operate by itself. The private system, the capitalist system, cannot operate by itself. They need each other to provide support in the way they approach the various different challenges and issues in the world. And if anybody wants to see it and get some better numbers around the national debt, I put a link in the thing. You might have seen that, Tom, is that, I mean, China is 1.06 trillion of the U.S. debt, and Japan is 1.28 trillion, and the total foreign debt is $7 trillion,
which is not even a quarter of the national debt right now. So most of it is held by the U.S. Well, that's great. I'll make sure the link for that article is in the blog post at purchasingtruth.com, along with the video of John Oliver explaining the debt. And, John's a comedian, and sometimes he does get a little political, but there's really good explanation there that is apolitical about
perspective.
Debt and perspective.
Perspective. We one of the things that's really hard about this show is that even though you and I have certain beliefs that do get influenced with bias and might not be fully true, it's when somebody says and hammers and tries to, and we've talked about this like a bazillion times, they try to, make bigger the debt to China and as a form of scaring others that you're gonna we're gonna owe, we're gonna owe them, and then what? It's like,
Oh,
there's no
well,
and then
then
what.
I heard one of them that, oh, well, we're going to be enslaved by the Chinese. That was another one that was just so hyperbolic and
Scary
nowhere
narrative.
based in truth. Yeah, that's very scary. And it really, it is, I think it's really important to have perspectives around debt and what it really means, because it is a necessary tool of
Yeah.
this capitalistic economy that we all live in.
Right.
Let's face it, this is a capitalist economy in the United States, right? And
Yeah.
it does take money a lot of times to grow business, to accelerate business, to
Yep.
create more jobs, and keep the engine of our country moving forward. Everything works better when the economy is growing. And unfortunately, here I have one other little perspective I think I'd like to throw in the mix here, Bill, and it's a different kind of debt. We talked about debt in the forms of stock or investors, and there was a really good example in the last few years of a Silicon Valley company called Theranos. Are you familiar with this one, Bill? Started by Elizabeth Holmes, and there's a documentary about it that I'll put in the show notes as well in an article. But they were in the pharma and medical space, not producing drugs, but producing lab tests, and they were supposed to be able to. They were inventing and creating technology that you could, with a finger prick, get enough blood to do all sorts of lab tests that you'd have to traditionally go into a real, like a Quest Labs or somebody, and get a lot of blood drawn.
Right.
And this company went from nothing to a 9 billion valuation before they'd sold anything or done any services, taking money from investors left and right. And so this is the kind of debt I'm talking about now, getting the debt with investors, and owing them. Well, it all ended up being a fraud. It got a long way. And it started on, I think, some promising technology, some invention that they believed was going to work. It didn't end up working. And the owner of the two key players in the company, this owner, Elizabeth Holmes, who, relatively young executive, she was, speaking on stages everywhere at the time when it was still thought to be this wonderful thing that was happening, was a big deal. And they started to try to roll it out at pharmacies like CVS and things like that, and it just didn't work. But it kind of was like this boulder that got rolling downhill that couldn't be stopped, because Elizabeth Holmes, the owner, and one of her key executive cohorts were not truthful that it wasn't working, and continuing to get more investment, perpetuating the lie. And eventually, of course, it all came crumbling down, and she's going to be on trial by the SEC and all sorts of things, and likely will spend a couple decades in jail. But that's not the worst part of it. The worst part is all these people and funds that invested money that they got in debt to as a company for stock. Now, it's a different kind of debt. Again, you're buying stock, buying ownership in a company, and it's risky. You're hoping you get a return, and there's no guarantee, but it was also fraudulent. So there's a different kind of a thing, but it gives you an example of different perspectives on money, raising money to accomplish goals in government, in business, and these are very complex things. And while I think we see a personal individual that's way in over their head in debt personally as a bad thing, that doesn't mean that a business that gets into a lot of debt to achieve their goals is a bad thing. In fact, it's how much of our economy works. Nor does it mean, if our government is going to get into debt for the greater good, hopefully, of allowing all these businesses to function and giving people jobs, is that a bad thing? I'm not so sure it is,
No, I think there's got to be a dance between the risk that we take and the growth that we would like to see. I mean, the growth, if we stay if we stay, like I think John mentioned this, but also a lot of the things, if our growth is staying ahead of the interest rate, then no, that's not a big problem because it's ahead of the interest rate. And I think John Oliver made a good point about that, but it's our belief structures have got to keep evolving and changing and adjusting. Think again, then think again, then think again, then have a new thought and think again. I mean, it's literally, it's a part of that. And there's a time when maybe, you and I are like 80 or 90, we'll say, whatever, I don't need to think again. All I got to do is watch and enjoy, like that. But it's still the process of think again. When a limiting belief crosses our path, we're going like, that's not true. Think again. How am I going to move this into the outside world and really create a moment of growth or change or innovation, or just to add to the mindset of managing debt, managing expenses and revenue, and just enjoy the show. And the government and the politics of this is going to go back and forth, trying to push the button of the voter. And that's the thing that I would like people to have awareness about, is just watch how your buttons are getting pushed when your side or the other side is saying something. Watch it, because those are your buttons that are getting pushed. Those are your need for truth or trust or respect or consideration or fairness. Don't let them push your fairness button. Don't let them push your respect button, because they'll get you. So but there's more to mention on this, Tom, but this has been a good show to really take a look at how do we adjust our belief structure to make it go better.
Okay, Bill, thanks so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.